Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Heil Jesu Christ, du höchstes Gut, which translates to Lord Jesus Christ, you highest good. This chorale has a couple of interesting harmonic quirks, and it does get a little dense at times in terms of chords and staying in the key versus moving to a new key. I think that this chorale is particularly ripe with modulation zones where it's interpretive in terms of where you think the modulation is going to occur. So I'm going to present my analysis as I do in all of my videos, but do keep in mind the fact that modulations can occur over a span rather than at a particular instance. It's very convenient when they do happen at a particular time, but usually they occur over the span of a length of time, and that's particularly true in this chorale. So 2 sharps in the key signature, we start on B minor, we end on B major, so I reckon we're in the key of B minor. First chord of the first complete measure is particularly interesting. We have C sharp, E, and B. We could make the argument that this is some sort of 2 chord, like a 2 diminished chord. However, what I really think is happening here is that this B is a suspension. This is just the way that I hear it. This C sharp, and this E right here all feel like chord tones. This D right here and this F sharp, those feel like passing tones. But really, the way that this B is repeated from the first, from the pickup, and it resolves down by half step, really feels like a 7/6 suspension over the bass. So I feel like this chord is just anticipating what's going to happen on the next measure, or on the next, not the next measure, the next beat, which is C sharp, E, G, and A sharp, which is 7/6/5, A sharp fully diminished 7th and first inversion. That's how I'm analyzing it. You could call this a 2-7 progression, but I feel like just like the case where we see 2 and 7 contextualized next to one another, doesn't really feel like a progression. And in this case, I feel like the suspension in the melody sort of overrides the fact that there are 2 individual chords here, and actually these 2 beats contribute to one larger chordal idea. But after our 7/6/5 chord, we have D, D, F sharp, and B, which is B minor in first inversion. That's 1/6, passing tone in the tenor before we get E, B, G, and C sharp. Now this could be a 2/6/5 chord, C sharp minor 7/5 over E, but I think in the same way that this 2 chord is happening right here, this B is an accented non-chord tone, and instead this is A sharp fully diminished 7th over E, so I'm going to call this 7/4/3. Whether you look at this as a 2/6/5 or as a 7/4/3 chord, I think they're more or less functioning the same way as like a pretonic chord, like a passing chord. After our 7/4/3 chord, we have F sharp, D, F sharp, and F sharp, B, F sharp, and D, which is B minor in second inversion. That's 1/6/4, and typically afterwards we would expect a 5 chord, which we get after some neighbor tones or just some non-chord tones in general. F sharp, A sharp, F sharp, and C sharp, which is F sharp major. That is our dominant. We have a passing 7th in the alto before our perfect authentic cadence concludes with B minor, B, B, D, and B, 3 roots and a third. Okay, looking ahead, we have a little bit of an interesting phrase. It ends in a half cadence in the key of B minor, but with the G sharp and the A natural here, I'm convinced that we go to A major for a considerable portion of this phrase. So I'm going to call this B minor chord our supertonic in the key of A minor, B minor, and sorry, not A minor, A major. Even though A minor can have a B minor chord in it, it's typically B diminished. But here in A major, B is a shared chord between the 2 keys and begins the 2-5-1 progression in the key of A major. E, G sharp, E, and B is E major, which is our dominant in the key of A. And then we have A, E, and C sharp, which is our tonic in the key of A. And as I mentioned before, you can, as far as modulations are concerned, because we have G natural here versus the G sharp here, you can say that the modulation is occurring really at any point from this point forward back to the key of B minor. But I feel like we're in the key of A major, if not just for the next couple of beats. But this G natural does raise a couple of red flags. In the key of A major, we expect G sharp, I said A as if I had multiple points there. No, there was a second point, but I lost my train of thought. It'll come back to me, but it's okay. This G natural is explainable in the key of A major. After our passing tone in the alto, we have A, E, G natural, and C sharp, which is A7 in root position. And instead of calling that a 7-7 chord in the key of B minor, I think this is a secondary dominant, 5-7 of 4, because A also happens to be the dominant of D, which is our subdominant in the key of A. And that's exactly where it goes, D, D, F sharp, and F sharp. One of those interesting double root, double third spellings, but a 4 chord nonetheless. And also where I think we move back to the key of B minor, D major also happens to be our median in the key of B. And we see that the median is a relatively common chord for Bach to modulate between keys with. We have a passing tone in the lower voices before we get B, F sharp, C, and E. As B is an accented non-chord tone, it's really A sharp, F sharp, C sharp, and E, which is F sharp 7 over A sharp. That's 5, 6, 5. Keep in mind this 3 to 5 progression later. It's consistent with the way that I've analyzed a couple of places in the chorale. I think there are 2 places where we see this progression. But yes, afterwards we get B, F sharp, C sharp, and D. This C is a 9/8 suspension that is ornamented by this A sharp here over the bass. But what's really being implied here is a tonic triad, B minor, that we get fully realized here on beat 2, B, F sharp, B, and D. And then we get this secondary leading tone that's functioning as a neighbor here before we cadence on 5. F sharp, A sharp, it carries over from that A sharp right there, and C sharp, which is our 5 chord F sharp major. Okay, looking ahead, we have a perfect authentic cadence. Sorry, I lost my train of thought there. A perfect authentic cadence in the key of B minor, but instead of going directly to the key of B minor, I think we go through A major again. So we start off with D, F sharp, A, and F sharp, which in the key of B minor is our 3 chord, and at this point we really have no reason to believe that we have modulated, because D is diatonic to the key of B minor, but we know that this is also the subdominant in the key of A minor. I think the fact that we're going back to A major through the chord that we left A major in is interesting, and also something that's pretty consistent with some of the patterns we see in Bach's chordal writing. But then we have a 4/3 suspension over the bass here in the alto, E, B, A, and E. But this A being a suspension, it's the G sharp we care about. This would be E major, which is our 5 chord in the key of A. And instead of immediately going to A major, we get a delayed progression where we have F sharp, A, and D, which is D major over F sharp, or 4/6. And we have some non-chord tones going on, a slurry of them. We have a passing tone, an anticipation, and a neighbor tone here, where we get G sharp, E, B, and D, which is E7 over G sharp. That's 5, 6, 5 in the key of A major. And then we get our resolution to A major, A, E, A, and C sharp, which is our tonic triad. And we have a passing tone in the tenor. Now this A sharp right here, like I said, modulation zone, you could say that we've modulated as early as the D major chord. You might even analyze this whole phrase in the key of B minor if that's how you hear it. This phrase sounds very clearly A major to me. Even with the A sharp in the bass, that could be explained as a secondary leading tone, because it really isn't until the cadence that it starts to feel very solidified, crystallized in the key of B minor. So I'm going to explain this A sharp, C, G, and E, another very interesting chord. I chose to call this 7/7 of 2 because A sharp is the leading tone to B, and B is our supertonic, or our 2, in the key of A major. But I think another valid analysis is calling this G natural an accented non-chord tone. I'm going to mark the F sharp as the non-chord tone because that's how I chose to analyze the chord. But you could flip-flop the roles of those 2 tones and decide which one you hear as the chord tone. You could also analyze this as F sharp, A, C, and E, which is 5, 6, 5 of 2. Either way, they're both dominant functioning chords, and the fact that they're separated by a half step is very interesting. So, yes, we would expect this to go to B minor, which it does, B, C sharp, F sharp, and D, but this C is an accented non-chord tone, kind of like a 9/8 suspension over the bass, carrying the C sharp over from the previous system. It's kind of hard to see suspensions when there is a line break, sorry about that. But with this B here, this would be our tonic in the key of B minor, but also our supertonic in the key of A major. But if we use our bracket to show that we have now modulated back to the key of B minor is now our tonic. So afterwards we have F sharp, B, F sharp, and C sharp. Again, another accented non-chord tone. It's the A sharp that we care about. F sharp, A sharp, F sharp, and C sharp, which is our 5 chord. F sharp major, and then we cadence on B minor, B, D, F sharp, and B, which is our tonic triad. Okay, looking ahead, we have an imperfect authentic cadence in the key of A major. Lots of oscillation between B and A. And the subtonic is a relatively common destination for Bach to modulate to in minor keys. But I think this is the first chorale we've seen where we've seen such alternation between the two of them without really visiting other keys. But that's going to be relatively short-lived because before he ends the chorale, we're going to get some movement to another key, more specifically D major. But starting things off right here, we probably have, it's a contender for the most interesting point in the chorale, at least from an analytical perspective. I think sound-wise, the first beat has this, beat. But what's interesting here is that we have B, B, F sharp, and D, which is B minor, but it's also paired with this G sharp here, which makes it G sharp diminished. So I do think this is where we move to the key of A major, and if we look on the downbeat, we see that, or on the pickup to the next phrase, this is a 2 chord, but I'm almost entirely convinced that this is a 7/6 chord as well. I am going to call it a 2 chord just because the chord is clearly being reiterated from the previous cadence, and we're going to call this G sharp a passing tone. But again, Bach really plays with this idea of 2 and 7 being one in the same. They're separated by a step, but they're really the only chordal, how do I describe it? The only chordal, like, thirds pair where the chords are very different in their function, and adding one note really, at least from like the harmonic narrative standpoint, they're very different but also very similar. They're different in function but very similar in sound. They're very polar in terms of their function because the 2 doesn't really function like a dominant, but the 7 is very clearly dominant, but they're only separated by one tone, G sharp versus F sharp in this case. I guess 3 and 5 also have that similar relationship as well, but we don't see Bach play with 3 and 5 all that often. We see them follow one after the other, but we seldom see 2 and 7, so like in this case right here, we have 3 immediately followed by 5. 3 to 5 is sort of like a mid-tier normative progression. It's not normative in the sense that it follows the cycle of falling fifths or the typical patterns that you would expect in tonal music, but Bach makes use of them, especially in modulatory schemes where we see 3 going to 5 immediately after a key change. But 2 going to 7, we seldom see 2 and then 7, or 7 and then 2 consecutive beats one after the other. We usually see them paired with one another over a subdivision, or where there is only one voice that's changing 2 to 7. So it feels less like a progression and more like counterpoint, which makes me feel like we have to decide between whether or not this is 2 or whether or not this is 7. And this has been a consistent theme throughout all of the analysis that I've done, however many chorales I've looked at so far, 200 plus chorales. But I'm convinced that Bach playing with these 2 and 7 chords feels like they're analogous to one another in terms of how they operate in the middle of a phrase, or at the beginning of a phrase, not in a cadential situation. But regardless, we have this 2 or 7/6 chord. I feel like it's 7/6, so I'm going to stick with 2 for the same reason that, you know, sometimes the 2 chord that turns into the 7 is sometimes preceded by its dominant. In some of the previous analysis I've done, that's a situation that we've had as well. But immediately afterwards, we get A, E, A, and C sharp, which is A major in root position, passing 7th in the bass, and then we get F sharp, D, G sharp, and B. You could make the argument that this is G sharp half diminished over F sharp, which would be 7, 4, 3, but I think this F sharp and this D are accented non-chord tones, and what we really get are E sharp, C sharp, G sharp, and B, which is C sharp 7 over E sharp, which is 5, 6, 5 of 6, because C sharp is the dominant of F sharp, and the chord that we get afterwards is F sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and A, our 6th chord, which makes me feel like this is a stronger analysis for what's happening on this beat. But it's a 6 of one, half dozen of another. Passing tone in the melody, passing tone in the tenor, and then we get F sharp, A, C sharp, and F sharp, which is just taking the F sharp chord and respelling it. 3 of the voices rotate, and then we get E natural, G sharp, and G sharp with this C sharp here. We could make the argument that there is sort of like a passing 3/6 chord here. I don't really think it contributes too much to the progression, but we'll leave it there because it is followed by a chord that would likely follow it. D, F sharp, and A, which is our 4 chord, D major. We have a passing 7th in the bass. This A is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. And then we get B, G sharp, B, D, G sharp, and B. That's G sharp diminished over B. That's 7, 6. 4 going to 7 is a good sign. It's a normative progression, cycle of falling fifths. And then we cadence on A major, A, E, A, and C sharp. Okay, looking ahead to the final phrase, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of B minor at the end of it with that Picardy third, as Bach often does. But I think we start things off immediately in the key of D major, and this feels relevant because we have this G natural here. So we're going to say that even though this is our tonic happening right here, we have a 5 chord in the key of D major. Kind of for the same reason that this A chord right here, we hadn't modulated to D. There wasn't enough context provided to feel like a key change was relevant in the key of D here, but it did give us enough of a push towards B minor after the fact for this D to feel relevant. But again, with A7 going to D, this time we're actually getting the key change. So we have that passing 7th going on in the alto, then we have B, D, F sharp, and D, which is B minor in root position, a deceptive progression, which is that B minor is our 6. This B is a chord tone, so we don't need to mark it. This G natural is a non-chord tone, so we will mark it. And then we get C sharp, F sharp, A, and E, which in the key of D major, I think this F sharp is an accented non-chord tone. This A is a chord tone, but I think if we look at this F sharp as the non-chord tone and then take the aggregate of the rest of the notes, you could make the argument that this is some type of like 3/4/3 chord, like F sharp minor 7 over C sharp. But I really think that this is an A7 chord over C sharp, which is 5, 6, 5. That's just the way that I hear it and I reason it, because 5, 6, 5 has played a pretty integral role in this chorale so far. We've had a 5, 6, 5 of 6. We've had a potential analysis of 5, 6, 5 of 2 here. So 5, 6, 5 has seen, and we also have a 5, 6, 5 chord here. So the fact that it's occurred a lot, the fact that we see the same spelling or the same analysis of a particular chord, I feel like that's relevant and strengthens or is an argument for the fact that that is an analysis that would be consistent with what's going on here. But 3, 4, 3, 5, 6, 5, the notes are here. It just depends on how you look at how literal you're taking the chords and how willing you are to look outside of what's exactly happening on the harmonic rhythm. But in contrapuntal situations, it can be difficult sometimes, and you do kind of have to look outside of the box, in my opinion. But after our 5, 6, 5 chord, we get D, D, F sharp, and F sharp. Another one of these interesting root, root, third, third spellings. It's a tonic triad with a passing 7th in the bass. And then we get B, C sharp, F sharp, and F sharp. And I think this is kind of interesting here. We have another one of these contrapuntal situations where voices are being suspended and sustained. I think all in all, this B is not part of the texture. It's this A sharp that or the B is part of the texture because the note is there, but it's not part of the chord that we're analyzing. We have A sharp, C sharp, F sharp, and I guess E because it's happening at the same time here when the A sharp gets introduced. So that would be another 5-6-5 chord, F sharp 7 over A sharp. Or, oh no, I'm sorry. That's my bad. This is 5-6-5 of 6 because we're in the key of D major now. Actually, no, we've modulated by this point. Apologies. This is still a 5-6-5 chord for sure, but we're in the key of B minor now because this is now our 3 chord, and we're seeing a progression very similar to one that we had when we ended the A section. So harmonically speaking, we're seeing some continuity between the end of the A section and how the B section is ending. So maybe there's some argument for, like, rounded binary as far as a formal description for what's going on here. But we have 5-6-5. We would expect a tonic triad to come after this, but we get counterpoints. So I think we get mostly a tonic triad though. We have B, C sharp, F sharp, and D. This C is obviously a 9/8 suspension over the bass, and the resolution occurs over a chord change, but I do think our tonic is being implied, even though the F sharp gets introduced at the same time as our chordal 7th. But in contrapuntal situations, we have to make some concessions for sure. Here we have G, B, E, and E. That's E minor over G, which is a 4-6 chord. There haven't been a ton of 4 chords in this chorale. We've had one here. We've had a couple. We've had 4 chords. That's just a coincidence, I bet. But we have a passing, 3 passing tones in the upper voices and the bass. Kind of spells a B minor triad in second inversion, but I don't think that's super important or integral to add to the chord progression. We then have E, B, G, and C sharp. That's C sharp minor 7 flat 5 over E, which is 2-6-5. And following that, we would expect a 5 chord, F sharp, A sharp, F sharp, and C, which is our 5 chord, our dominant. We have a passing 7th in the alto before we cadence not on B minor, but B major, as Bach often does in his minor chorales. He ends with that Picardy 3rd, and I imagine he does that because he wants to leave the listener in like an uplifted state, because he spent pretty much the entirety of the chorale in a minor sound world. But that's going to conclude today's analysis. This particular 2/7 chord going on here is very interesting, as well as this 2/7 chord. It's interesting that the 2 sort of points of contention that I spent the most time talking about happened over 2/7 chords. Definitely very fascinating to me, and something that I am really excited to continue to codify or explore over the course of my broader analysis as I look over the rest of the chorale harmonizations. But if you're interested in following me along on this journey, I would love it if you subscribe to the channel and you hit the notification icon so you get notified of when my daily upload goes live. If you want your daily dose of Bach or your daily dose of analysis, you are in the right place, and I'd be happy to have you along for the journey. But on that note, thank you so much for watching the video. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for supporting the channel by doing so. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.